They call it the most haunted hotel in America. The Crescent Hotel in Arkansas. A mountain resort by day, a ghost story by night. Tourists check in to chase thrills, but the locals lower their voices when its name comes up. They don't tell jokes. They tell warnings. The Crescent wasn't always a hotel. In the 1880s, it opened as a glamorous resort, the Grand Old Lady of the Ozarks, with marble floors and wide verandas. But the shine didn't last. In the 1930s, a man named Norman Baker bought it. He wasn't a doctor, though he dressed like one in white suits and purple ties. He turned the hotel into a cancer hospital. His cure was a lie: strange tonics, useless machines, painful procedures. People came here desperate to live, and most of them died in its rooms. Their bodies were carried out quietly, but their stories never left. Now, almost a century later, people don't remember Baker for fraud. They remember the screams, the patients who never got to go home, the ones who may still linger in the basement. That's why they call it haunted. I wasn't here for ghosts. I was a doctor in training, a resident drowning in shifts and caffeine. A friend joked, "Go down to Arkansas. Spend a night at the Crescent. See if the ghosts cure you." He laughed, but the idea stuck. I booked a room. Maybe I wanted to see the place for myself, to look past the ghost tours and cheap thrills, to remind myself that Baker wasn't a legend. He was a predator who preyed on the sick. His hotel wasn't magic. It was a tomb. The drive into Eureka Springs wound through dense forest, the road curling tighter the closer I got. When I rounded the last bend, I saw it. White stone against the sky, towers stabbing upward, windows like dark eyes. It didn't look like a refuge. It looked like it was waiting. Inside, the lobby was polished wood and chandeliers. Tourists laughed too loudly, their voices bouncing against the walls as if to cover up the silence underneath. The woman at the desk handed me my key on a brass tag. Her smile looked rehearsed. "Just one night?" she asked. I nodded. "Then stay on your floor," she added. "Don't wander late." Her voice was casual, but her pause wasn't. The grand staircase groaned as I climbed. Oil portraits lined the walls, stern faces staring down, eyes that seemed to follow me. By the time I reached my room, the air felt heavier, as if the hotel had closed its hand around me. The room itself was plain. A bed, a dresser, wallpaper faded with age. Normal in every way. I sat on the mattress, waiting for the unease to fade. It didn't. A draft brushed my arm, though the window was shut tight. I pulled out my recorder. Habit. Crescent Hotel. Doctor's note. Day 1. Nothing unusual. My voice sounded thin in the empty room. I set it down, turned off the light, and stared at the ceiling. This trip was supposed to be rest. Just a night away. But even then, lying in the silence, I couldn't shake the thought. This place still belonged to its patients. And maybe, now, it belonged to me. I told myself I wasn't here for ghosts. I was a doctor. I dealt with facts, not campfire stories. Norman Baker wasn't a phantom in the halls. He was a con man who preyed on desperate people, and the only thing haunting this place was his cruelty. That's what I repeated as I walked through Eureka Springs the next morning. The town looked harmless. Victorian houses, antique shops, tourists with cameras. But under that postcard charm was something unspoken. Conversations cut short when the Crescent came up, like people didn't want to give the place power by naming it. Even the laughter on the streets seemed thinner when the hotel was in view, like the building drained it from the air. In a small shop that smelled of cedar, I asked the woman at the counter about the hotel. Her smile froze. "My brother went there," she whispered. "Baker promised he'd be cured. We never saw him again." Her voice cracked on the last word. Then she turned away, busying herself with postcards. That was the end of it. It wasn't what she said, it was how. No gossip, no exaggeration. Just grief, sharp even after decades. At lunch I sat in a noisy diner, flipping through a hotel pamphlet. Ghost tours. Visit the morgue. See room 218. It read like a circus poster. I pushed it aside, but the woman's voice stayed in my head. We never saw him again. Later, I overheard 2 locals at the counter. One muttered, "Tourists think it's all fun until they stay in the wrong room." His friend hushed him, noticed me listening, and they left without finishing their coffee. By the time I returned to the hotel, my shield of logic was slipping. I repeated under my breath, "I'm a doctor. Cancer doesn't vanish with colored lights and bottled tonics. People died here because of fraud, not demons." Saying it aloud almost made it feel true. Almost. That evening I paced the halls. The carpets muffled my steps, but sometimes I heard another set of footsteps behind me. When I turned, nothing. Once, in a hallway mirror, my reflection seemed to lag by a heartbeat. The lights above flickered as if straining to hold back something I couldn't see. Unease clung to me like static. Every creak of the floorboards made me sit up in bed. Shadows bent wrong across the walls. Then came the slow footsteps outside my door, steady, stopping at the threshold. I held my breath. No knock. When I opened the door, the hallway stretched empty, bulbs flickering overhead, portraits staring down as if they knew something I didn't. Old building, I muttered. Sound carries. A rational explanation. Always a rational explanation. But deep down, I couldn't shake the thought. If the patients had nowhere else to go, maybe they never left. And if that was true, I wasn't alone in this hotel. The Crescent was quieter after midnight. Too quiet. The laughter from the bar was gone. The tours finished, the halls hollow. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, until I heard it. Footsteps. Not random creaks, but steady steps moving past my door. I cracked it open. At the far end, a staff member in a dark uniform walked quickly toward the stairwell. No flashlight, no keys. His shoes barely made a sound as he vanished into the basement. I told myself not to follow. Staff had their routines, and this wasn't my business. But minutes later, restless and tense, I had my flashlight in hand and was heading after him, pulse climbing with every step. The staircase moaned under my weight. The air grew colder, laced with mildew and chemicals. By the time I reached the bottom, my breath fogged in front of me. The corridor stretched long and damp, pipes dripping in steady rhythms. The staffer was gone. Only silence remained, thick as stone. I moved forward, light skittering over doors nailed shut with rough boards. Behind one came a muffled thump. Then another. Slow. Deliberate. My gut twisted. Old pipes, I muttered. But the sound came again, 3 knocks. Clearer. Closer. On a table nearby sat my recorder. The same one I'd left upstairs. Its light was off, yet my own voice hissed from it. Don't go further. My chest tightened. A prank, I told myself. Someone had stolen it. That was the only explanation. But the distortion in the words didn't sound human, and the way the syllables dragged made my skin crawl. I shoved the recorder into my pocket, my hands slick with sweat. Ahead, a wheelchair sat facing me, its leather cracked, its wheels rusted. My light caught something slumped in the seat. A shadow, a figure. I blinked, and it was gone. My throat tightened. No, I'm not buying this. Saying it out loud was the only way to steady myself, even if my voice shook. At the corridor's end, a metal door stood ajar. Inside was a low room lit by a single flickering bulb. In the center, an operating table waited, straps dangling like claws. Files lay scattered across the floor, yellow and brittle. I knelt and picked one up. A patient's name. Then another. Another. Dozens of them. My skin went cold as I found one that stopped me flat, blank, except for a single line typed at the top. My name. The paper slipped from my hand. My pulse hammered in my ears. No, this isn't real. The pounding behind the boarded doors erupted, fists hammering like they were about to break through. My recorder buzzed in my pocket, switching on by itself. My voice came again. This time it didn't whisper. It laughed. I shut my eyes, heart racing. Not real, I said, forcing the words out. But the truth pressed heavy. The safe world of facts and reason was gone. I had stepped across a line into something I couldn't explain. And whatever it was, it had been waiting for me. I didn't sleep. Not after that. I sat on the bed until the sun bled weak light through the curtains, trying to convince myself that I hadn't seen what I saw. A missing staff member. A recorder speaking in my voice. Files with my name typed decades ago. None of it could be real. By morning, the hotel was noisy again. Tourists clattered down the stairs, kids raced through the halls, and the staff smiled like nothing had happened. I told myself it was nothing, an overactive mind, fatigue, the kind of tricks a building like this plays on you. But that didn't hold for long. In the hallway, a cleaning cart stood abandoned. The mirror on the wall beside it reflected not me, but something delayed. My reflection blinked 3 seconds too late, its smile hanging even after my mouth had gone flat. I jerked my head to the side. The reflection did the same, late, but perfect. I slammed my fist against the glass. It trembled, then showed me as normal. My pulse wouldn't settle. Later, I passed the library. Papers were scattered across the floor, as though a wind had blown through. I bent to pick one up and froze. It was another patient chart, edges brittle, name scrawled across it in ink. Unknown, male, 29. My exact age. The lights flickered overhead. Every paper on the floor stirred at once, sliding across the carpet like they'd been pulled by unseen hands. I backed out of the room and shut the door hard. By evening, I tried to laugh it off. I sat in the lobby with coffee, telling myself the mirror was a trick of the eyes, the papers just a coincidence. But the longer I sat, the more I noticed shadows moving against the grain of the light. They slid across the far wall when no one was there, like stains that wouldn't wash out. At dinner, I pushed food around my plate, appetite gone. The couple at the next table spoke in low voices. "They still hear the patients," the woman whispered. "They're still down there." I wanted to turn and demand what she meant, but I didn't. When I finally returned to my room, the door was already open. I stepped inside slowly. My bag was untouched. The bed was neat, but on the nightstand, my recorder lay waiting, though I hadn't left it there. The red light blinked. I hadn't pressed play, but it was already recording. I pressed stop with a shaking hand and rewound it. The tape hissed. Then a voice. My own. "You can't leave," it said. "You're already a patient." I dropped it onto the carpet like it was hot metal. The air in the room thickened, heavy and pressing. My chest heaved. I ran to the mirror above the dresser, desperate for something normal. But my reflection didn't move this time. It stayed perfectly still, watching, while I staggered forward. Only when I touched the glass did it finally mimic me, a second too late, grinning as though it knew I was trapped. I told myself it wasn't real, that I was exhausted, that the stress of residency had followed me here. But deep down, I knew better. The Crescent was testing me, and I was failing. By the third night, the Crescent wasn't letting me rest. I kept hearing the same knocks from the boarded doors, the same footsteps in the hall. I told myself it was nerves, exhaustion, anything but real. Then I found the note. It was waiting on the desk in my room when I came back from dinner. A scrap of yellow paper, rough edges, one word scrawled in black ink, basement. At first I thought housekeeping left it as a joke. But the handwriting, it was mine. Exact. Every curve of every letter. My chest went tight. I shoved it into my pocket, telling myself to ignore it, but my eyes kept going to the stairwell door. Finally, close to midnight, I gave up. Flashlight in one hand, recorder in the other, I went down. The air grew colder with every step, thick with mildew and metal. Pipes hissed like whispers along the ceiling. At the bottom, the hallway stretched longer than I remembered. My watch said 3:07 a.m. A few steps later, it blinked 7:14. Then when I checked again, it was 3:07 again. My pulse hammered. I tapped the glass, but the hands didn't make sense anymore. Halfway down, I found a room with its door ajar. Inside stood a long metal table. On it lay boxes filled with objects, shoes, eyeglasses, rings, even a child's toy rabbit missing one ear. Personal things, collected and abandoned, like the morgue trays I'd seen during my rotations. Each item a piece of someone who never left. I tried to breathe steady, but the air clung to my lungs. Further down, a chair sat in the shadows. Not empty. A figure slumped in it, wearing the same dark uniform as the staff member I'd seen 2 nights ago. I lifted the flashlight, but his face was wrong, blurred, as though the light itself refused to show it. "Hey," I called, forcing my voice steady. No answer. The figure shifted slightly, like breathing, then went still. I backed away fast, muttering, No, I'm not seeing this." But my logic cracked. In the hospital, I'd seen patients in psychosis, convinced their hallucinations were real. They swore at shadows, cried at voices only they could hear. I used to tell myself I'd never be like them. Yet here I was, clutching a flashlight in the dark, asking myself, what if it's me now? What if this is my breakdown? The corridor stretched on, doors sagging open into more rooms lined with metal frames, rusted restraints, scratches gouged deep into the plaster. Every step forward felt like a dare. My watch ticked uselessly, frozen between times that didn't exist. Behind me came breathing. Slow, heavy, too close. I spun, but the hallway was empty. Only the slumped figure in the chair, farther back now, but still turned toward me. I wanted to run, but my feet moved deeper instead. My mind screamed for rational answers. Air pressure, drafts, fatigue, but the words rang hollow. I wasn't just walking through a basement anymore. I was descending into something older, something that had been waiting far longer than me. And I didn't know if I was still in control of myself. At the end of the corridor, I didn't find a door this time. I found an elevator. It was ancient, iron grate for a door, brass buttons worn flat, the kind you see in hospitals from 100 years ago. I shouldn't have trusted it, but when I pressed the call button, the cage rattled to life, shuddering as if it hadn't moved in decades. The doors groaned open. I stepped inside, clutching my flashlight. There were only 2 buttons, lobby and basement. But when I pressed basement, the car groaned and dropped past it, deeper and deeper, well below where the hotel's foundation should have ended. My stomach rose into my throat. The air got colder, and by the time the doors opened again, my watch read 3:07, then blinked to 6:22, then back to 3:07. The chamber beyond was wide and circular, carved from stone that looked older than the Crescent itself. Chains lined the walls, but the shelves weren't filled with jars. They were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, black and white portraits of patients. Some faces were blurred, others scratched out, and a few had my face staring back, pasted where there should have been. I staggered back, while rising. That's when the voices began. Not whispers this time, clearer, sharper. And they weren't strangers. They were voices I knew. My old professor, a patient who died during my residency, my mother, all of them speaking at once inside my skull. You can help us. You can finish it. You know what to do. I shook my head violently. You're not real, I said. You're not here. The photographs trembled on the shelves as though moved by unseen hands. One slipped free and fell at my feet. A man's face, blurred beyond recognition, except for the eyes. They were mine. My knees buckled. I picked up the leather journal lying on the stone altar in the center of the room. It was Baker's. His handwriting filled the pages, but he hadn't written alone. The knowledge was not mine. One entry read, I learned from the one before me. The keeper showed me the signs, the way to use the sickness, to draw it out and feed it to the stone. Another page described a ritual. 3 offerings, a name, a memory, and a wound. Speak the name, surrender the memory, spill the blood, Baker had written. Then the doorway will close. My flashlight buzzed, dimming, shadows stretching long across the chamber. The voices grew harsher. Say your name. Give us your past. Cut yourself open. That's the price. I clenched the book shut, shaking my head. No, I'm not part of this. You killed them. You used them. But even as I said it, doubt clawed at me. If this is real, if the ritual works, maybe they weren't victims. Maybe they were sacrifices. Maybe they gave themselves a chance I can't understand. My hands trembled. If this is true, then maybe they had hope. The elevator behind me groaned shut on its own. The chamber pulsed with heat, stone glowing faintly under the grooves carved into its floor. My watch blinked through hours like seconds. I realized then there was no way back up until I chose. Either I accepted the ritual, or I became another photograph on the shelves. The journal felt heavy in my hands, heavier than paper had any right to be. Baker's neat handwriting filled every page, but beneath it I could see faint traces of another script, symbols scrawled in older ink, as if someone before him had written the same instructions. Baker wasn't the beginning. He had only inherited the knowledge. One passage made my stomach clench. They were never patients. They were vessels. The sickness made them open, made them useful. Each death fed the keeper beneath the stone, kept it contained. I did not cure them. I offered them. I flipped through more pages, my hands slick with sweat. There were drawings of circles, diagrams of altars, lists of names followed by short notes. Compliant, resistant, screamed for hours. The handwriting was calm, detached, as though he were logging lab results, not human suffering. On the last page, a line written heavier than the rest. When my time ends, another will take my place. The doorway chooses. I froze. The word burned in my mind. Chooses. The voices rose again, overlapping, sharper now. I heard my professor from med school, his voice cold. You always wanted to save people. Here's your chance. I heard my old patient, the one who had begged me for more time. You let me die. You won't let this one die too. And worst of all, I heard my mother, soft and steady. Do what must be done. I clutched my head, the journal slipping from my fingers. The photographs on the shelves fluttered, dozens of faces turning blurry until they all looked like mine. "No," I said, stumbling back. "I'm not him. I'm not Baker. I'm not your keeper." But the truth was cracking through my denial. The Crescent wasn't a hotel. It was a prison. And Baker hadn't failed because he was cruel. He had failed because he hadn't finished the ritual. The evil seal beneath these stones was still here, waiting, and the patients weren't simply victims. They were pieces of the lock. I stared at the journal, the words echoing in my head. A name, a memory, a wound. It was obscene, grotesque. Yet if it worked, if it truly sealed whatever lived beneath this place, then maybe all those who had died here hadn't just been consumed. Maybe they had bought a few more decades of peace for the world above. The chamber pulsed with heat. My watch spun wildly, hours vanishing in seconds, then snapping back to the same time. 3:07. Always 3:07. The moment the cycle wanted to repeat, I whispered to myself, voice shaking. If this is true, maybe they weren't victims. Maybe they were guardians. The voices swelled in agreement, triumphant, filling my skull until I thought it would split. Now it is your turn. Name, memory, wound. Close the doorway. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the sound only grew. My flashlight flickered and died. The only light left came from the glowing grooves on the floor, forming a half-completed circle. The realization sank like ice in my chest. I wasn't a visitor anymore. I was the next entry in the journal. The grooves in the stone glowed faintly, waiting. The voices pressed harder against my skull, relentless. Name, memory, wound. My throat locked. Every part of me wanted to run, but there was no way back. The elevator was gone, the walls humming with heat, the shelves of photographs trembling as if they were breathing. "Fine," I whispered. My voice cracked. "You want it? You'll get it." The name. It felt stupid at first, standing in the middle of that circle, speaking aloud. But the word tore out of me anyway. My name is Daniel Hayes. The moment I said it, the sound seemed to split, echoing not against the stone but inside me. My name bounced back in a dozen voices. My own, my professor's, my mother's, repeated until it didn't sound like mine anymore. The memory. The voices surged, demanding more. My chest heaved. My worst memory clawed to the surface before I could stop it. A patient, 19 years old, dying of leukemia. I'd promised him he had more time. I'd smiled, lied, tried to comfort him. He died 2 days later. His parents never forgave me. "I give it up," I said through gritted teeth. "Take it. I don't want it anymore." The stone pulsed. For a moment, the memory blurred, like film burning in a projector. His face slipped away. Relief and guilt hit me at once. The wound. This one was simpler. My hand trembled as I pulled a scalpel from the rusted table. The metal was warm. I pressed it against my palm and dragged hard. Pain shot through me, blood welling bright. The stone drank it, the grooves glowing brighter, red seeping into them like veins filling. The chamber shook. The photographs fluttered violently, some tearing free, dozens of blurred faces raining down. The voices screamed, not outside, but inside me. My head felt like it would split open. The journal slid across the floor, pages flapping, as if invisible hands wanted me to see the last entry. When the circle closes, silence will follow. The keeper will rest. I staggered forward, smearing blood across the last gap in the grooves. The circle burned white-hot, light pouring upward, so bright it seared my eyes. The chains rattled. The walls trembled. The voices screamed like a storm breaking, and then, all at once, stopped. Silence. The chamber went still. The glow faded. My blood dried black in the carved lines. I fell to my knees, gasping. For a moment, the silence was worse than the noise. It felt wrong, like the world had been emptied. Then, slowly, I realized what it meant. The doorway was closed. The thing beneath the crescent was sealed again, but it had taken pieces of me to do it. My name no longer felt like mine. My memory of that patient was gone, a hole where his face used to be. My hand throbbed, blood still dripping onto the stone. I had finished what Baker couldn't, but I had no idea what it had cost me. I don't remember climbing out. One moment I was on the stone floor, blood drying on my hand, the silence pressing against my ears like a weight. The next, I was stumbling back into the elevator cage. It rattled and groaned, cables screaming, but it carried me upward through blackness until the doors finally yawned open into the basement hall. The corridor looked the same as before, damp, empty, but different too. The pounding behind the boarded doors was gone. The air was still. For the first time since I'd arrived, nothing whispered, nothing breathed down my neck. It was as if the building had exhaled after holding its breath for decades. I moved like a ghost myself, pushing through the stairwell, back up into the lobby. Dawn was spreading pale light through the windows, streaking the marble floor. Tourists were already up, chatting, ordering breakfast, snapping photos of the haunted hotel. They smiled, oblivious, as though the night hadn't happened at all. I must have looked insane. My clothes were torn, my hand wrapped in blood. I stumbled out onto the veranda, and a couple stopped eating their pancakes to stare. A man asked if I was okay. I didn't answer. My voice felt foreign in my own throat, like it belonged to someone else. The fresh air hit me like a slap. Outside, the town was waking up, shopkeepers unlocking doors, kids riding bikes, cars humming down the street. Normal. Completely normal. Too normal. It was hard to believe that just beneath their feet, a nightmare still pulsed, locked away again for now. I leaned against a railing, dizzy, staring at the rising sun. It should have felt like freedom, but it didn't. It felt like exile. I knew I didn't belong with the laughing tourists anymore. I had been too deep, seen too much. A woman passed me on the sidewalk, glanced up at the hotel, and crossed herself quickly before hurrying on. I understood her now. They didn't avoid the Crescent because of silly ghost stories. They avoided it because some part of them knew. I wandered into town, pale and unsteady, like a man half awake. A few locals watched me. One old man muttered, another one. Then he spat on the ground and turned away. His words clung to me, heavier than any stare. By the time I made it back to my rented room in Eureka Springs, I collapsed into bed and slept like the dead. No dreams, no voices, just silence. When I woke, the sun was high, and for the first time in days, the weight in my chest was gone. But I knew it wouldn't last. I'd sealed the circle. I'd given the doorway what it wanted. But the cost wasn't finished. A piece of me had been taken down into that chamber. My name didn't sound like mine anymore. My past had holes where memories used to be, and the wound in my palm kept reopening, bleeding fresh every time I thought about it. I had left the Crescent Hotel, but the Crescent Hotel hadn't left me, and somehow I knew it never would. Its shadow stretched far beyond those stone walls, and now it was inside me. I came back to Chicago and went straight into the hospital. Residency doesn't wait for anyone. Rounds, charts, emergencies, it all swept me up again like nothing had happened. But I wasn't the same. The hospital smelled of antiseptic, sharp and clean, but under it I caught something else, stone dust, mildew, that same metallic tang from the Crescent's basement. My colleagues joked about me looking pale, exhausted, burned out. I laughed along, but inside I knew the truth. On my first night shift back, I walked through the oncology ward. Rows of patients lay in dim light, for bags dripping. I froze mid-step. For a second, their faces blurred, shifting like the photographs in the chamber beneath the hotel. A woman stirred, opened her eyes, and for a moment I swore she whispered my name. I shook it off, forcing myself back into routine. Blood tests, notes, vital signs. But the Crescent followed me. In the beeping of heart monitors, I sometimes heard the faint rhythm of the knocking behind boarded doors. In the silence of a patient's final breath, I felt the heavy hush of the sealed circle. My hand still hadn't healed. The cut reopened at random, thin lines of blood streaking my gloves during exams. I told the others it was an old injury. They believed me. I didn't believe myself. Sometimes I took out the recorder. I never pressed play, never pressed record, but it clicked on by itself more than once. My voice would spill out, distorted and wrong. Don't fail them. Finish what was started. I told no one. Who could I tell? If I said the Crescent Hotel was alive, that Baker wasn't a fraud but a priest of something older, they'd lock me in psych. So I smiled, I worked, I kept moving. But I felt it inside me. I had carried something out of Arkansas. Or maybe it had carried me. At night, when I finally lay down, sleep didn't come easy. I saw the circle carved into stone, glowing with blood. I saw photographs peeling from walls and landing at my feet. No matter who they showed, the face was mine. Some nights I woke with a photo in my hand, edges damp, though I never left the bed. I had gone to the Crescent as a doctor desperate for rest. I had left as something else. Not Baker. Not just a survivor. The next in line. The patients here looked at me differently now. Some smiled, others stared too long, like they recognized me from somewhere they couldn't name. And when I looked back, I wondered if the hotel's shadow was reaching for them through me. I was still wearing the coat, still taking notes, still playing my role. But medicine wasn't my only duty anymore. I was keeping a doorway closed, every second, every breath. And each day, I felt it pressing harder, waiting for me to slip. And the worst part? I couldn't tell if the Crescent was locked away from the world, or if the world was locked away from me. And in the quiet moments, when the ward lights dimmed and the halls emptied, I sometimes felt the floor hum beneath my feet, like the stone was already calling me back.